we continue chronologically with a paper on late antique uses of the Stadia in Greece by another CYA colleague, Nikos Tsivikis, a Byzantine archaeologist and historian who's published widely on Byzantine archaeology, Byzantine epigraphy, sculpture, who has an excavation at Amorion, and is it the very southern point of Anatolia? That's Animal. Right. You're in central Anamorium. All right. But for our purposes, and particularly lucky for our students who get tours of the site, he is also an excavator at Messene, about which he's going to speak. Thank you, Nova.
Okay. Okay. So, it is a great honor for me to be here today presenting to our fine conference. This event also has allowed me to become acquainted with the work and personality of Evgen and the impact he had on CYA. So I feel really lucky for that. And additionally, this marks for me the first time I present here with also my dual identity as a professor here at CYA. I'm also honored to present our work on ancient Messene, a unique site. And we were fortunate to have the guidance of Petros Temelis, one of the most important archaeologists of art of the previous generation. And I would like to dedicate this talk to his memory, as this past November he left us. As nearly everything we discuss about Messene, everything that I will show you today owes its existence to his hard work and persistent vision. So as I'm the last speaker, I will try to skip certain parts. And with those serious reflections shared, allow me to shift to a lighter tone as we delve into the heart of my subject. First of all, this is not the first time, believe me, that I have presented a paper at a conference populated by classicists, mostly, on the aftermath of their period of interest. The last days, the day after. So you can choose the word. In this setting, the historical processes of late Roman, late Antique, or early Byzantine archaeology can be presented as the last chapter of a really long story. Almost like an inescapable destiny of sites and monuments leading from decline to decay and from decrepit to desolation, many Ds. So once again, I am here offering this final paper, something like a dessert of a fine feast. But I need to warn my classist friends here that leaving the last chair to the people working on late antiquity actually often means letting the public taste this fine, strange, exotic, sweet taste that has partly led to the expansion of late antique studies into an unprecedented proportions. So next time you invite me, put me on the on the first spot, like when everybody's still sleeping. You see that almost Baron Pierre de Coubertin in this nice text that Sophie Matson chose. He was Sophie Remsen chose. He was also enchanted by late antiquity. Okay, so late antique athletics have actually been in the epicenter of a number of studies lately. And I would like to mention Sophie Remsen, that we have already heard her name more than once here, and also the fine monograph of Alexander Puck, unfortunately written in German, thus getting few references. In most of these studies, it is the history of athletics being scrutinized, partially because archaeologists have not taken such an interest, and also because the remains of these periods, so it's the story, the history, and not the remains, because the remains from this period are petty and unassuming compared to the actual athletic buildings of the previous Hellenistic and Roman period when they were first built. So an introduction to the subject of late antique stadia that I'm attempting is actually means an introduction, a discussion about late antique modifications of previously built Hellenistic and Roman stadia. What kind of uses did they get? And when did this happen? So this will be my thread of presentation today, surrounding mostly the case of Messene. The city of Messene was a major urban center of the Hellenistic and Roman Peloponnese and the regional economic and cultural hub for the wider Messenia region. Messene adapted quickly to the Roman realities and became a close ally to the Romans, governed by wealthy local elites with strong ties to Italy. This led to its resurgence as a city full of renovated ancient monuments, with wealthy and influential local elites in imperial times. It was the museum-like city, glorified by the detailed description of Pausanias in the 2nd century of our Common Era. As with most of the settlements of Achaia, besides maybe Corinth, but even there, historical evolution during the 3rd and 4th century becomes extremely difficult to follow. Nevertheless, the city shows signs of resilience during the 3rd and early 4th century, when a good number of public buildings and wealthy urban mansions remained in use. A clear archaeological layer associated with a major catastrophic event has been lately identified all over the site of Messene, or some places. When we say all over, it's not, never believe us, and can be easily discerned in many different spots. This is characterized by the collapse of entire buildings after their complete abandonment. This horizon, almost in every case, can be dated by rich coin finds into the late 4th century, the latest of them minted in the early 360s. The coins, you see some of the find spots, combined with other kind of material culture, point strongly to an event in the 360s, after which the built environment of Messene was probably altered for good. This event was, we believe, probably the great earthquake of 365 of our Common Era. It clearly disturbed city life, but it also meant the preservation of important evidence about the city in the 3rd and mostly the 4th century. In this, we can trace the final period of a Roman or Greco-Roman Indian summer, quote unquote, in ancient Messene, with major civic buildings being constructed and maintained. City's imperial dedications, traditional sculpture, but also, and quite importantly, the presence of an active early Christian community will play a role in my narrative today. The effects that the great earthquake of 365 had to the city must have been dire. Coupled with the insecurity of the late 4th century, it led to large parts of the city being deserted for more than a generation. So we need to reach the 5th century in order to see again intense activity at the site, although by now the city had largely been transformed. The old city grid was disregarded. Most of the civic buildings were not in use. In this archaeological horizon, coming from the earthquake of 365 and the subsequent crisis of the city that enables to follow in detail historical processes of the 3rd and 4th century, we can see situations that in most other cases have eluded us. And it is largely through this that we will follow the evolution of space and use at the great stadium of the city of Messene, the general area of which you can see on the screen. Actually, it's tilted, so north is right and south is left, but in order to offer more in the screen. I will be starting from the context and the evolution of the neighborhood surrounding the stadium, from Hellenistic into the late Roman times. And for this, what characterizes this latest phase, I will choose two better understood building complexes framing the stadium itself. So you see one on its north, one on its south. It will be a late Roman domus on the north, and maybe one of the earliest Christian attestations found in Messene in the cemeteries that start south of the stadium. Thus, our first stop is the late Roman domus situated to the north of the complex. You can see it in front and to the right. The domus occupied much of an insula on a major crossroad of the street and led further south to the monumental entrance. You can see the street as we have cleaned it, leading to the monumental entrance of the Stadium Gymnasium complex. The house, located strategically, exhibited typical elements of a domus, of a late Roman private urban house. It consisted of a large number of rooms at ground floor level, out of which we can recognize the typical arrangement. The entire area of the domus was found to be buried under the same distinct destruction layer of the 4th century. The domus itself, although it incorporates parts of earlier constructions, must have acquired its latest form in the 3rd and 4th century during the last use that we are now interested in. The most prominent rooms of this domus had mosaic paved floors with geometric patterns that are survive only partially today. The style and technique of the mosaic floors further corroborate to a 3rd or 4th century dating for the entire domus. A medium-sized room next to the main impluvium of, this has a pointer also. So this is the main impluvium. We are talking about this room. Was paved with a mosaic floor that, besides geometrical patterns, included also a single mythological scene in a central emblem that I believe it's important for our discussion. In the small panel that you see on the left, 3 human figures are presented. A reclined male figure with an athletic, young, naked body in the center, and a female on the right side in close interaction, and thirdly, a small-scale male figure on the left, gesturing towards the central figure. Although the composition is somehow crude and it making the identification difficult, the panel is executed in careful detail with the use of fine marble and glass tessera in an opus vermiculatum. The mosaic panel had been for long interpreted by the excavator as portraying a divine couple, Dionysus and Ariadne, embracing him. Recent research, though, has identified it as a scene belonging to the iconographical cycle of the myth of Adonis, as you can see on the right, and depicting the dying Adonis being treated by Aphrodite. And you can see in these examples that they perfectly fit, one from Pompeii and the second from a very good quality sarcophagus of the 2nd century. The relaxed young athletic male form leaning at its back in the center should be identified as the mortally wounded Adonis at the moment after his deadly encounter with the boar during the hunt. The wounds are visible in the shape of a white bandage wrapped around his left thigh, stained with red blood. In this reading, the raised right hand is a gesture of need and despair, seeking care, while his entire posture is a sign of life departing his body. The female form of Aphrodite is living in agony these final moments of her lover. As we can see in the iconographical models to the right, the Messene mosaic constitutes one of the latest, at least the latest I know, depiction in a long series and introducing a number of unique late antique characteristics. At the same time, in the mosaic, this is not right, never mind. The most enigmatic figure remains the male form to the left of the viewer that is interacting with the dying god's hand, actually kissing it. This smaller scale human form could be identified as one of the servants that we saw in the previous iconography, though it is definitely doing something different. It's beardless, it's young, there are many differences. This figure has been interpreted in the past as a possible portrait of the donor or owner of the house in a gesture of reverence towards the divine hand. I tend to agree with this view, and I would like to further pose the possibility that this scene intentionally merges iconographic traditions with acts and gestures that were expected to be performed as part of cultic rituals by the owners at home. Much like what we can observe in two, okay, we suffice with one, very strange late antique enigmatic mosaics from Sparta Lacedaemona, where these forms, theater actors, or we don't know what, they are revering Dionysus himself. And if our stadion in its late use is framed on one side by the religious syncretism and experimentation of late antiquity, on the other side, its south side, we can trace some of the newest evolutions in late Roman society and the emergence of Christian communities. Much before the coming of Christianity, the Stadium of Messene had functioned as a special space for the heroization of the past elites of the city in conjunction with the educative and training role played by the gymnasium. This has been lately very well portrayed and discussed in an excellent study by Nigel Kennel. So he can contribute in the discussion in many ways. So I do not also need to expand much, besides offering some visual reminders of the funerary, the great funerary monuments of the Stadium and Gymnasium area. And you can see one here, K3, and an even more important one here, built for the Cephidas family in the Roman times. So these are monuments built, I mean, some of them in Hellenistic period, some of them later, but they are in constant use through at least up to the 2nd century. It is in this environment and mnemonic landscape of the Stadium, Gymnasium, that we see probably our first Christian individual in the city of Messene popping up. It seems that we can now expand the use of the funerary monuments to the 3rd or even 4th century of our Common Era, as exhibited by a recent find of a fine-dressed ashlar stone with a nice inscription on its front. It comes from a lesser-known funerary monument. You can see it here, when excavated next to the Cephidas one. Probably a Roman creation that stood outside the city, the limit of the city. The stone bears the name of Diomedes, a truly antiquizing mythological name, and the single adjective, that of Christianos. The inscription can be read as a typical short funerary text, and very early because it's in its shortness, like many before in the funerary monuments of the area, Hellenistic and Roman inscriptions, brief like this, but for the first time it introduces this identifier as a Christianos, although it still wants to pose this individual next to his family, to his kin, with his new identity. So syncretism on one side, Christians on the other side, a stadium being used and populated all through the period that we're interested in. But what can we see if we focus on the actual building of the stadium? The impressive Hellenistic stadium of the city of Messene has been studied adequately, and its main early phases have been documented. The form we see today is the result of a major Roman remodeling of the 1st century. Even we like naming all this Hellenistic, but actually there are very well-educated Roman interventions on the Hellenistic past. Echoing, of course, the original building with the stadium. You see the building of the stadium, the gymnasium surrounding it, and the palestra, this fine palestra, where John Caravas trained his fighting students. Also, what we see here refer to, and the study today is what we see today. I mean, this is a 2023 picture, and it's the result of a long effort of restoration and conservation of our team So we have to think the agency, the archaeological agency, and of Petros Themelis, and an image from the late 80s and early 90s can prove that the condition, the situation that the stadium was when excavated is far from what we see in this gentrified, restored, finally restored. I'm not criticizing the restoration. The stadium proper seems to have experienced its last phase of use and modification during the 4th century. By that moment, it probably was the main, for sure, but probably the only space for public spectacles in the city of the Messene. Before that, we know that Messene had a theater, an auditorium, and the stadium. Probably by the 4th century, it's only the stadium that it's in use, as we can see from the archaeological horizons. It was during this period, or perhaps even before, from the 3rd century, that it had changed radically in form in order to accommodate new uses. The new use meant that the stadium was not intended anymore by the city residents for sports, athletics, as we understand them, and we don't know where did they go. So it is a big discussion the athletics themselves, they were symbolizing Greek athletics things that by now they are not accommodated, at least in the main edifice built for them. And more in use for beast fighting, venitationes, or gladiatorial games. We don't have much evidence about Munera. The main transformation of the stadium and its newly acquired late Roman features can be located in two main areas, the cavea and the course track. In the cavea of the stadium, on the upper surfaces of most of the stone benches during the last periods of use, family names and maybe names of groups or associational names of Messenians and were inscribed with large letters defining the whole surface and extending to cover a large number of seats. In this way, a number of the seats or even entire rows in the stadium were turned from public in spaces into privately owned or rented by the members of these families or the groupings. These individuals or groups, we know from many other occasions, could then make these seats available at will also to third parties. It's very difficult to study them. Also, restoration has moved around some, but we can see a nice Roman name here, Enianou, just giving us an idea of what these would have been read. Vula Bardani, our epigraphist, is working on that. The phenomenon of having specific seats marked and destined for the use of special members of the community in theatrical buildings of the Greek and Roman antiquity goes back to earliest periods and mostly refers to civic, to people holding civic positions. In Roman times, this practice grows widely and evolves and even gets institutionalized in relative legislation, always within the logic of civic and sometimes religious city traditions, and to the aim of projecting social certification and power. It was during imperial and mostly late Roman times that reserving seats was related to the tendency of appropriation of public space, often by individuals or by various groups. The nature of the cut names exceeds personal identification of family groupings and includes also other forms of associations, guilds, tribes, sports groups occasionally. Dating these writings can be very difficult, as the inscriptions do not provide usually any chronological indication, but as part of a relative chronology system, we generally understand that inscriptions reserving seats should be, or for political institutions should be of an earlier phase, while inscriptions referring to individuals and the families or associations, professional associations, are of later date, usually late Roman or even early Byzantine. We know that the Colosseum in Rome gets seat inscriptions in the 5th century by the Senate, by the late Senate members. Okay, I'm moving a bit forward. Probably connected with the inscription of names on the seats of the stadium were two further major modifications marking this last phase of use. In front of the first row of seats in the lower cover, a low parapet wall was built. Actually, you can see here in this old excavation and here, and zoom in, you see this is the wall that we are mentioning. In this photograph, the course has not been yet excavated, so it looks high. This wall may be a bit better while being removed before the restoration of this part. You can see it here. This wall was built in a non-monumental way with small rubble stones and all kinds of reused material. It even included some stone benches of the first rows that eventually became unusable. This was an obvious intervention in order to exclude even further the arena by now from the spectator stands, and can be interpreted as an indicator that the arena was used for blooded sports. Along this parapet wall and near the edge of it, rectangular cuts were located in regular intervals. These can be interpreted as dowel holes for the fixing of wooden posts and the net, maybe barrier, that would rise to considerable height and ensure the separation of the stands from the arena, and don't have any animal like jumping on you. The second modification of the course of the stadium into an arena came with the closing of the southern part with a semicircular wall that abutted on the two straight sides of the stadium. So this is the wall. As it turns, at the center is a bit lost, but you can trace it. So it comes and abuts nicely curved on the Hellenistic wall. The wall was built in the same casual and non-monumental way as the parapet. The result of this conversion made the old Greek Hellenistic stadium to resemble more to a Roman amphitheater, with an elliptical arena having two curved spinner, effectively ending the possibility of staging running events, if they were to be done anymore. This type of building was not unknown, and in antiquity, it had a name. It was called the Stadia Amphitheatron, as attested in 1st and 2nd century inscriptions from Laodicea. The southern semicircular wall was freestanding in our case, and there never were any stands erected behind it. The conversion of the stadium into an amphitheater with an arena cannot be easily dated also. During the excavation within the arena, the latest coins retrieved belong to the middle of the 4th century, according to the general pattern that we see, hinting at us that the final use should be dated close to the period that we're referring the time of the earthquake. It seems that after the earthquake, nothing is, for at least a generation, things are very strange. Towards the reconstruction of the stadium into an amphitheater in the late 3rd or early 4th century point also the archaeological parallels. The practice of blocking the larger ancient arenas or field tracks of stadiums in order to create smaller areas is quite common, as seen in many cities of Asia Minor, like Aphrodisias, which actually was a stadium amphitheater, but in the 4th, 5th century, it became this small limited area that was more manageable. Maybe the best example now being under excavation is Perge, and the Turkish colleagues, they have excavated these fine rooms that they would be vaulted, not just a simple wall. And you can also see the parapet wall here. And other places like Ephesus, Aspendos, Laodicea. it's interesting, as always, Messene, the monuments of Messene, they find their parallels mostly in the great Hellenistic cities of Asia Minor rather than here. But we have a good example from a great construction of later period. That would be the Panathinaike Stadium just next to us. That at least it has been reported in the old excavation that it had this kind of a curved wall before getting all kind of Christian uses in the 5th and 6th century. Most of the converted stadiums are generally dated late in the course of the 4th and 5th century, but the process seems to have started already in the 2nd century as the earliest one. So, like in Nicopolis, in Adactium, or in a number of stadiums in Palestine. In all these cases, antique buildings that were probably no longer in use or no longer useful as they were converted and modernized in the 3rd and 4th century to respond to the new needs of their respective communities. It has been noted that most of the conversions of stadiums into arena amphitheaters in Greece and Asia Minor are of late date and can be connected initially with gladiatorial games, munera. That is a problem for South Greece because there's not so much, and they are already declined by the 2nd century. They're expensive, or early 3rd century, or much more with a low register, venationes, beast fighting, or beast shows that seem to be flourishing from the 3rd and in the 4th and 5th century. In the Greek case, connected to the limited information that we have about gladiatorial games, it has been proposed that these late amphitheaters transformation were made for the growing interest for venationes. In the city of Messene, so far, no epigraphical or other find has been discovered that could be connected with munera or venationes. A fact indicative maybe especially for gladiatorial games. Some information might come from a partially preserved and unknown mosaic floor from the Great Domus east of the Asclepieion, built in the 3rd and early 4th century, inside what probably was the residence of the most prominent local official Messene. And in this mosaic floor, we have a small panel of a hunt or a venatio that might reflect a bit to what was happening in the stadium of Messene. But if we turn our eye in the general region of Messenia, the best evidence we have about late Roman agricultural mansions, they provide us also with ample evidence about venationes playing an important role for local late Roman society. So in a rural villa in the Silas, very, very close to Messene, that was excavated in the early 20th century near Andania, just 15 kilometers from Messene. One that has been dated in the 4th to 5th century. The central panel of its floor mosaic shows actually this very rich venatio scene with this very good quality venatores taming and challenging the wild animals. This all is now housed in the Kalamata Archaeological Museum. Really good quality. Interesting is also the part that the Silas mosaic also incorporates these fantastic charioteers, this Evinion that is riding a chariot with these panthers, and this Evnudas, another panther chariot riding guy. In another rural villa near Koroni, this time at the village at the site of Agia Triada, we have another very interesting mosaic that is, you can see it in the museum, it's been exhibited with a central panel of Dionysus, but at least three scenes or four. They are all, you can see these scenes of lion fighting, bull fighting by these well equipped individuals, all of this dated in the 3rd or 4th century. Since Messene has always been, for the cities of Messenia, the center for public and mostly religious gatherings, so it would be logical to imagine that also the scenes depicted in the villa floors would somehow be connected with feasts taking place in the converted stadium of Messene. It's the only such locale that we know. Equipped with facilities for Venationes in the general area of southwest Peloponnese. We can conclude that in the late 3rd or early 4th century, the stadium of Messene underwent a significant renovation that transformed it into a stadium amphitheater, changing also its use. The stadium by then was probably the only functioning spectacle venue in the city with such a radical rebuilding. The other two, the theater and the ecclesiasterion, Odeum, had underwent some minor modifications, but they seem to have been in little use after the mid-3rd century. Based on this observation, it seems plausible that this new amphitheater was also the main venue for public spectacles in the city of Messene and in the wider region. Probably the use of the Messenian amphitheater ended permanently after 365. And in this way, it can help us understand a completely unknown aspect of the evolution of stadia in mainland Greece. Thank you.
You're absolutely right. I mean, you don't want to end on such a rich dessert. We should have had a cheese course.
Okay, yeah. Maybe volunteers.
Please, well.
Thank you so much, Nikos, for this fantastic talk. Do we know anything about what was happening in the abandoned part of the stadium after the amphitheater area was built, but before the earthquake?
No, we do not.
Thank you.
And clear as that.
Roughly how long would these renovations
How long?
to transform?
About by what we presented here, I wouldn't say that it would take much. I mean, it is a concentrated effort. It would be a certain cost. It might mean renovations also on other parts, like I know, maybe putting things back together.
Within a year, they could knock these
I
things
would
up
say
pretty
yes.
quickly.
Yeah. I'd say yes. Okay, let me say one last thing. I hope that I'm not becoming unpleasant, but you see, with this example, we have to have in mind that our concern today, most in Greece, mostly, this reflects to the authorities, in restoring theatrical buildings to a certain period that they can host again shows. And this period is at a very certain point. It means, it has meant up to today, it doesn't mean that it has to be like that. It means cleansing away rich historical information about the late antique, Roman uses. So often when I see a new theater will be renovated in this city or the other city or the third city, I think what will happen about with all this information. I think we can devise ways to keep it like partially, but we have to have in mind that
just a question, I'm not, I don't have your expert. I think So based on your, I'm losing. So about, you know, the stadiums and how they're used, and now, you know, you're just, you know, comment that you made about using all these beautiful monuments, and based on what you just talked to us about how they were reusing it, but in a respectful way, would you suggest that we could even nowadays use it in a more contemporary way, where we could, you know, in order to preserve them and maybe draw more attention to the younger generations, maybe add on or next to the area? Because like, how many young people would visit Messene nowadays unless they're forced by their high school teachers to go and do a day trip there?
I'm definitely for use. I mean, as Petros Temelis would say, the only way for monuments to survive is being used. And actually, in our smallest theater, the auditorium, we host annually the festival for school drama. So that brings many schools from all over Greece, let's say an interesting event. Or the stadium itself, there are many events have been staged there. I mean, my favorite was during the pandemic, there was this great Belgian DJ, Sophie Veld or Van die Veld, something like that, a very an amazing DJ, and she played in there. So I don't mind the uses. You can do whatever. There are no sacrilegious uses to me. The only thing that I just want to bring in mind is the intervention that we do and what we restore and what we and what we clear away. Thank you. Thank you.